Voice Mama Bear Podcast, episode 26. I'm your host, Sarah Yacoub. Today's topic, who the heck is the WMC? Happy Monday, everyone. As I work my way through season 1 of the podcast, I'm torn. On the one hand, my goal is to shine a giant floodlight on the corruption and dirty politics that currently cut off any hope of good government in Wisconsin, and that make having a state government that serves hardworking families a pipe dream. On the other hand, I can only imagine how tired you must be as listeners of all the outrage, as I am the speaker, am exhausted from weeding through all of this nonsense. Part of why gluttonous fat cat politicians in Wisconsin get away with their corruption is the amount of energy and social inconvenience needed to expose all of this. We, as a mainstream public, haven't talked about any of this for so long that there's a lot to unpack. For Western Wisconsin, where the local newspaper does not actually report on that which happens in this state, we produce no shortage of voters who are led to believe that the false depiction of a Pleasantville-like bubble as conveyed by the local newspaper is actually real life, or that things are, just fine under Republican governance. Trying to unpack all of the barriers to political sanity is like inheriting and trying to clean out a house completely saturated by a lifetime of someone who was severely mentally ill and a hoarder. Insult to injury, while Walker is gone, his legislators are still there towing his line. Where we get access to and start cleaning up one proverbial room of this house, GOP legislators are those who obstruct the process. Lie to our faces, telling us there is, in fact, no problem at all and it's all in our heads, and double down on the saturation of the proverbial house as a function of more hoarding. What about just waiting it out and waiting for the hoarding to stop or to pass? Doesn't work. Corruption is the gift that keeps on giving. There are no shortage of dirty politicians willing to jump in and toe the line that is Walker's legacy. Shannon Zimmerman is the perfect example. He is a second-generation Walker politician, but carries on the atrocious legacy of Walker the same. We'd be naive to think that they aren't already grooming another generation of corrupt politicians to fill his shoes once he's moved on, or finds himself sitting in well-earned prison for his mass-scale voter and election fraud. So, it's now or never. If not us, then who? Either we stand up, say enough, and be willing to go through the motions of cleaning up this mess, or we continue to drown in it. What does any of this have to do with the WMC? The WMC, or Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, is the dark money behind Wisconsin's corruption. It's one of these groups that sounds like it's a good idea, and therefore out for our public interests, but is really not. Our time here today will only begin to skim the surface of who they are and their corrosiveness to state government, conservation, and working families in Wisconsin. I invite you to dig deeper and learn for yourself who they are and what they do. To say it's eye-opening doesn't quite do the harm they do justice. Horrifying is a better fitting word. Traditionally, we hear of and from the WMC during election time. They spend millions of dollars protecting their rubber stamp politicians and spreading nasty lies about anyone who threatens to unseat them. I know the WMC personally. In furtherance of insulating their rubber stamp politician Shannon Zimmerman, they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to lie about me as a survivor of a dangerous first marriage and exploiting an incident in which I protected myself and our then 3-month-old infant. I wonder if there's a special place in hell for those who beat up on and lie about survivors of domestic abuse for political gain. I find peace in that despite all of the ugliness, all of the local mean girls who very publicly went to work for Shannon and perpetuated his and the WMC's lies, I find peace in that God sees all of it, and that, on his time, it'll be okay. The WMC is so insulated by their money and power that lying about anyone challenging their rubber stamp politician is, well, par for the course. In a community defined and limited by identity politics, who is going to stop them? How do they fit into Wisconsin policy? Let's dive into 2 examples. Number 1, lead paint, and number 2, contaminated water. In 2005, the Wisconsin Supreme Court issued a decision, Thomas v. Mallet, which validated risk contribution theory as a basis upon which to seek relief. This wasn't a new legal concept, as risk contribution liability was an issue in the 1980s with a drug that was used to prevent miscarriages but instead caused all sorts of harm. The Thomas case involved a child who suffered lead paint poisoning and dealt with the issue of whether he could sue paint manufacturers who knowingly used or marketed a known poison in their product at the time he was exposed to that poison. The court found yes, and that the burden would then shift to the companies producing that poison to prove that they either did not in fact use or market that poison, or that their product was not used in the region or the house where the poison was located. Then Justice Louis Butler wrote the decision. He then went on to be the first Wisconsin justice to lose re-election in over 4 decades. The WMC went to war to remove him for following the law. By following the law, he was able to stick up for the rights of poisoned children and working families in their efforts to seek relief from companies recklessly exposing them to poison with conscious disregard for their health, fertility, and all to maximize their profit. The WMC didn't like that. In 2011, after getting Walker and their rubber stamp Republican legislators elected, the WMC got its legislation to undo the ruling that held paint companies responsible for the harm caused. In 2013, Walker and his legislators went a step further and adopted a state budget that effectively blocked the then pending lead paint lawsuits of 171 children and their families. Is anyone surprised that the WMC is on the wrong side of policy concerning contaminated or poisoned water? I'm certainly not. As reported last week by Up North News, which is a glimmer of hope for news in Northwest Wisconsin, even if they are a bit timid in covering Republican corruption, Republican legislators removed rules that would have kept the chemical mixture of perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, commonly known as PFAS, out of our waterways. What do PFAS do? In addition to not breaking down easily in nature, exposure to them threatens our health, fertility, namely leading to pregnancy complications, miscarriages, cancer, and death. This is not a hard one. This is one of those issues that we should all be able to agree upon. Who wants increased miscarriages, infertility, cancer, and death as a function of their exposure to water in Wisconsin? I can safely say no one. So how is it that these politicians who are voting against all of our interests and the WMC who funds these disgusting legislative efforts continue to get reelected? Identity politics strikes again. You see, if the WMC can make you hate or distrust Democrats enough, we'll continue to be rubber stamp voters for any politician with an R next to their name on the ballot. In a community that is too polite to talk politics, where the social pressure is to keep our heads down, shut up, and have another beer, again, I ask, who is going to stop them? The WMC centers around money and power. As of late, in light of COVID-19, they've placed themselves in front of the antisocial, science-denying efforts of local extremists. The WMC has written letters to encourage and empower their deviant, anarchist, and unlawful responses to any and all efforts to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in order to get our economy back on track. Why? Because this group of people, identifiably Trump's base, are loud and organized. They believe in and perpetuate lies like Democrats are socialists, or just waiting to jump out of the bushes with the communist flag. They are a consolidated fringe base with which the WMC shares in their agenda of getting Republicans elected. The fact that many in Trump's base truly value things like safe, clean water, food, and air begs a few questions. Do they really not know what the WMC is all about? That they are literally on the wrong side of every single issue in history? Do they know and just not care? Is it that they're just willing to compromise their values as a means to an end of validated feelings or in their pursuit of power? The WMC has a lot of money, and that money comes with power. How many have been blinded by that money, that quest for power, to the detriment of us all? After all, which is easier? Not talking about any of this, pretending like the WMC is not the public policy manifestation of evil, and sticking our heads in the sand, or having hard conversations and dealing with the responsibility that is speaking up for right in the face of wrong in a community that makes doing so really unappealing. It's not a mystery why or how the WMC and Walker's death grip on Wisconsin continues to this day. If you're wondering when we'll talk about the Tavern League, you read my mind, and that's definitely a podcast for another day. Going back to that hypothetical house that you inherit but that is knee-deep in hoarded stuff everywhere, while it may be tempting to dismiss it as too big a task, sell the place at a loss, and simply walk away, that house is Wisconsin, home to millions, and she's worth fighting for. Episode 27 tomorrow. See you there.